Today's devotional thoughts come from Acts chapter 27, verses 13 through 38. Have you ever imagined yourself inside one of the characters of your favorite storybook? Or envisioned putting on that red cape and flying over the city to make a miraculous save? Or plunge through the waterfalls on the back of a giant bird? Now, I loved reading stories to my kids and now my grandkids when I get a chance. And stories that get our minds thinking, imagining what could be, experiencing things that we would love to do one day or dream up of what we could even be. And every once in a while, I would create stories for my kids that made no sense at all, like the dinosaur who roamed on an ocean floor to only come up and eat a cat out of a boat. Or the story of the three ballerina fairy bears that wore tutus and each had a special gift. You know, stories that created memories for our kids that they now share with their own children. It gives them something to remember and to be a part of. My question for you: do you realize that you have a story to tell as well? One that is not made up or one that is not unimportant, but a real life story, one that God is currently working in? In today's reading, Acts 27, it shares the time of Paul making his way to Rome as a prisoner on a ship, and all seems so hopeless. With all the raging storms hitting them and the ship breaking apart, they might get lost and they would be destroyed at sea, and that would be the end of it. Paul's story would have ended. And Paul even tried warning them, but of course they weren't paying any mind to him as a prisoner. But as the story continues, it reveals that an angel was sent by God, and he met up with Paul and on that ship, and he gave him encouragement that all would be fine. All is not lost. And it wasn't the most pleasant of trips I am sure Paul would have wanted, and definitely a different way that he probably thought he was participating in God's story. But in this particular event, you'll read how Paul was an instrument and how others were encouragement to him as well on the ship to Rome. And that, as most of you know, is only a part of Paul's story and God's story. God's story is not always revealed right away as we are walking in it and through it. And unlike fairy tales that come to some sort of happy ending, we ponder how our story could possibly be a part of the story of God. Now, maybe it wasn't the original intent or how you thought things are going to play out. And I imagine that with Paul too, that he thought this cannot be the way that I'm supposed to be sharing the gospel, or even what God definitely wanted. But we can definitely know that God moved and provided a way for it to be integrated into the redemptive restoration story of God. And it was not a waste. Your story is also a part of the overall bigger story of God as well. And maybe something wasn't a part of God's original plan for you, but I reassure you, nothing is unused for God's work to be revealed. You know, we have a Bible of books that share God's story overall, and we must not forget them. Psalm 66, verse 16 says, "Come and listen, all you who honor God. I will tell you what God has done for me." The psalmist shares, and he invites us into their story and how God's salvation was brought about for them. Come and listen. We must not forget what God has done, is doing, and will continue to do. God's story is working, and it's at work right now through all of our situations, in the midst of our circumstances and questions. we must not forget that God will and is working amongst us. We don't necessarily know the end of it or the end of our stories, but we can be reassured that God will be revealing something either to us or to those who come after us. Last week, if I'm to be honest, was a really hard week for me. And a lot was going on, and some family decisions were having to be made. And I was a bit depressed and emotional, but I was also reminded of a few things later on. And the one thing out of that I was reminded of was how God is still with me, even when things are difficult. And this too will be a part of not only my story, but of God's biggest story down the road. And we are all invited into His story, one that is taking place already, and we wonder how perhaps we got here or perhaps how we got there. There will be a place if you allow God to be a part of it, a part of you. And He will help shape you, challenge you, perhaps stretch you a little, or maybe even a lot. Think through how God gave you strength, courage. Perhaps it was peace and comfort. Maybe your story is a hard one that hurts and is painful. Or maybe God provided something practical in a tangible sort of way when you really needed it. I encourage you, think about your story, journal it, blog about it, share it with your family and friends. Allow God in to help shape you and to have your story become a part of His greater piece of work. Let Him work through you. I would love for you to either put one word down in the comments below or a brief sentence of how God has done something for you during this COVID-19 season. How have you seen God at work in your life today? God's story doesn't end, even if you don't see how your story plays a part, or even if you don't see God in it. It will have been a part of a much bigger piece, one that continues beyond yourself. Who knows who your story will reach? I look forward to reading yours. Have a blessed day.